Most people think that to get revenge on a toxic boss, you need to yell. You need to storm out. You need to slam the door on your way out. But if you have a degree in structural engineering, you don't need a loud voice. You just need to know exactly where the foundation is weak. My boss thought I was replaceable, until he realized I was the only thing holding his multi-million-dollar expansion together. Today, we're looking at what happens when corporate greed underestimates expertise, and why experts aren't just employees. They're the gatekeepers of reality. I worked for a mid-sized construction firm that was expanding aggressively. New offices, new warehouses, new contracts. My role: senior structural engineer, which sounds fancy. But in reality, it meant one thing. If the math was wrong, everything collapsed. Literally. My boss, Greg, loved to call himself visionary. Talked about growth, speed, dominance in the market. But Greg had one flaw. He didn't understand what he didn't understand. To him, I wasn't a specialist. I was overhead, a line item, a salary, a cost to be reduced. The trouble started the week my father passed away. I requested 3 days of bereavement leave. 3, not a month, not a week. 3 days. Greg called me into his office. He didn't even close the door. He said, "We are in the middle of the expansion deadline. I need you focused," I explained. My voice was calm. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Everyone loses someone. The project can't." That was the moment something shifted. Not anger, clarity. When someone in a position of authority dismisses a specialized expert, they are often suffering from something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's when someone lacks the knowledge to understand how much they don't know. Greg saw himself as a decisive leader, but he didn't understand structural load tolerances. He didn't understand soil variance. He didn't understand liability exposure. He just understood deadlines and spreadsheets. To him, I wasn't a structural engineer. I was a delay. I stayed. But something inside me changed. Up until that moment, I had been loyal. I had worked weekends, reviewed designs at midnight, caught errors before they became lawsuits. But loyalty is a two-way street, and I had just learned it only went one direction. The expansion project was ambitious, a large mixed-use facility. Office space on top, retail below, underground parking, tight urban lots, complicated load transfer system, and a rushed timeline. There was one critical issue I had flagged weeks earlier. The soil report showed unexpected variability. Certain sections required deeper reinforcement, additional pilings, more concrete, more cost. Greg didn't like cost. He told me to make it work. But in structural engineering, physics doesn't negotiate. When I formally documented the soil instability risk, he brushed it off. He told the board we were on track. He told investors delays were minimal. He told the contractors to proceed. That's when I did the only thing a professional can do in a toxic system. I documented everything. Emails, recommendations, risk assessments, revised load calculations. formal notices. Because documentation is the ultimate weapon against a bully. Greg made one final mistake. He approved a revised budget that removed additional soil reinforcement without my written sign-off. He assumed I'd stay quiet. After all, I needed the job, right? What he forgot was that my professional license wasn't owned by his company. It was mine. My name was attached to those structural approvals, not his. This is where something called moral disengagement enters the picture. Moral disengagement is when someone convinces themselves that harmful decisions are justified because of a greater goal. Greg convinced himself the expansion deadline was sacred, that investor confidence mattered more than engineering caution, that my father's death was inconvenient, that structural reinforcement was optional. He reframed risk as efficiency and human loss as weakness. That's how toxic corporate cultures thrive. They prioritize metrics over morality. So, I did something very simple. I refused to stamp the final structural drawings. Without proper soil reinforcement calculations, I would not attach my license. No signature, no approval, no permit clearance. Greg panicked. Suddenly, I wasn't a line item anymore. I was the gate. Without my certification, the city wouldn't issue final structural approval. Without approval, construction halted. Without construction, investors started asking questions. He called me into his office again. This time, the door was closed. His voice was lower. He said, "We can't afford delays." I said calmly, "We can't afford collapse." He threatened to replace me. I encouraged him to try, finding another engineer willing to inherit documented structural risk on a compressed timeline with visible soil instability. Wasn't easy, especially when all concerns were already archived in company email. He realized something. I wasn't sabotaging the project. I was protecting it. From him, within 2 weeks, the board stepped in. They requested full documentation. They saw the flagged reports, the cost-cutting revisions, the ignored warnings, the missing signature. The expansion was paused. Independent consultants were brought in. My calculations were validated. Additional reinforcement was approved. The budget increased. Greg's authority decreased. I didn't yell. I didn't quit dramatically. I didn't destroy anything. I simply refused to compromise physics. And in doing so, I forced reality to confront ego. Greg wasn't fired, not immediately. He was once fired, but he was reassigned. Quietly. Away from direct oversight, the expansion resumed. With proper reinforcement. And I received something I never asked for. Respect. Here's what this story really reveals. Life lesson 1. Your expertise is leverage. Never let someone who cannot do your job determine its value. Life lesson 2. Documentation is protection. When dealing with toxic authority, facts are stronger than emotion. Life lesson 3. Loyalty must be mutual. If someone abandons you in your darkest hour, they do not deserve you in your brightest. Revenge doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like calm refusal. Sometimes it looks like holding the line. Sometimes it looks like understanding that your signature is power. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever used your professional skills to stand up to a toxic boss? Have you ever realized you were more valuable than they thought? Tell me your pro-revenge story in the comments, because sometimes the strongest move is simply knowing where the foundation is weak.